On today's show, we're crossing it over with the guys over at Locked On Leafs to discuss the Maple Leafs offseason, William Nylander at center, the goalie situation, and where we expect the Toronto Maple Leafs to finish in the Atlantic Division.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into this special crossover edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers and Locked On Toronto Maple Leafs podcast. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Florida Panthers and Locked On Leafs your first listen of the day. For everyone on the Maple Leafs feed, my name is Armando Velez. I'm from the Hockey News, and you can follow me on X at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. Shout out to all the everydayers on both Locked On Panthers and Locked On Leafs for coming in and getting your daily hockey fix. And very thankful to be joined by the two hosts of Locked On Leafs, Mike Distefano and David Morassutti. Great to be connecting with you guys.
Yeah, it's great, man. I know we're now sworn enemies, but more so sworn enemies than before. But it's always great to catch up with after, especially after what happened last year. So no hard feelings anymore. But it's good to be talking again.
And I know you two specifically aren't part of the crowd of the whole "We Want Florida" chants. I know you guys spoke on your show about that's only a certain section of it as well, but yeah, those were things that the Florida Panthers fan base were running with the whole time, especially after the 5-game series that the Florida Panthers and the Toronto Maple Leafs went through. But let's go through the Toronto Maple Leafs just for the Panthers feed, a little bit of the guys who are out of the door for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Matt Murray's on LTIR. Noel Acciari went to the Pittsburgh Penguins. Justin Hall went to the Detroit Red Wings. Ryan O'Reilly to Nashville, and Luke Shen, Michael Bunting to Carolina, and Philip Gustafson to the New York Rangers. But in comes Tyler Bertuzzi from the Boston Bruins / Detroit Red Wings. Ryan Reeves, a journeyman forward for recently in Minnesota. John Glimberg, Dallas and Anaheim. Martin Jones as the third string goalie, more than likely, and Max Domi coming in after his father, Ty Domi. So as far as offseason for the Leafs, and both of these teams have one thing in common. These two teams are contenders. These two teams are teams that are up against the salary cap, and they are going to be even with the rise. But how do you see about what Toronto lost versus what they gained?
Well, I can't forget that they also lost their GM, Kyle Dubas, and brought in
Yes.
Brad Treliving. And I think that's notable because when you look at the turnover on the roster, it makes a little bit more sense when you look and see, okay, well, they're going in a slightly new direction. The main cast of characters are the same, which did surprise a lot of people. Dave and I, talked about this a lot after the Leafs got eliminated, that we felt that, something had to change within the core and something had to change maybe even with the coach, and neither of those things happened. Instead, it was the GM who got the boot, which, kind of surprised a lot of people. That being said, Treliving came in and you just went over all the players that had gone out the door and that he brought in. And, deciphering whether this team is better or if they're worse is going to be difficult to do, obviously, right off the get-go. Gonna have to wait and see until what they look like. Gotta wait and gotta play the games, right? And see how it works out. But what I think we can deduce from the offseason is that this team is going to be built differently. They went out and they addressed the size portion of this roster, I guess you could say, with adding dudes like Ryan Reeves, adding guys like Tyler Bertuzzi, Max Domi, A word that Brad Treliving, the new GM, used in like his opening day press conference or after he had signed these players after free agency was snot. These guys bring snot, and that's what they want to bring to the lineup. Something that they felt that was lacking a little bit once he took over. So whether or not they're a better team for it on paper, I don't think we can quite answer that yet. But they're definitely a different team, and maybe different can be better because it's been a little bit of the same old. What is different though is they've last season they added a little bit of toughness in the bottom of their lineup and within the depth. The guys who they've added this time around will play significant minutes. Tyler Bertuzzi and Max Domi, namely, and you just know that should mean that you'll see that actually come to fruition a little bit more. So I'm excited for the season. I'm excited to see what these new additions can do, and if in fact this whole snot, piss and vinegar, style of play will work out better than what the Leafs have been able to do over the last 5-6 years under Kyle Dubas.
Yeah, and like when we look at what kind of went wrong in the Panthers series, because like that's one thing that teams have to be guarded about is not overreacting too much to what happens in one playoff series. But in the Leafs case, it's like they realize they needed a different mix up front, as Mike said, right? So they bring in some of these new guys, and they're going to bring something a little different to the lineup. And then you look at the back end. That was the thing that I thought maybe would get the most overhaul, and it got the least overhaul, right?
Yeah.
Like literally only one addition was made, and that was John Klingberg. Yeah, they trimmed around the edges by bringing in Simon Benoit. But other than that, like this defense remains vastly unchanged. They lose Luke Shen, which actually, in a way, kind of was a tough departure for them, considering what he brought to them in the playoffs. So that's probably the one area where that's going to be an area to watch all year for this Leafs team, because this is a very tough division, and you have to be able to defend, and not just defend, but defend in the right areas. Right, that was kind of the issue in the Florida series, whether it was mistakes or getting caught, not having your assignments right, or not being able to handle Florida's aggressive forecheck at times, like things like that. Those were areas I thought the Leafs didn't really address enough this offseason with this blue line. They have time, obviously, to always make changes and try to figure out ways to, move guys out. But with today's NHL, it's not going to be that easy.
Yeah, and we talk about the only one addition to the blue line, and I remember there was this one play specifically in, I believe it was game 2, where I believe it was Jake McCabe goes on a pinch in the neutral zone, and then Carter Verhaeghe goes on a breakaway that leads to a goal for the Panthers very early on in this series. Some might see these moves as more lateral moves for the Toronto Maple Leafs, but I mean, you talk about piss and vinegar. I think as well as like bringing in some sandpaper, as like Tyler Bertuzzi. I mean, he was a pain in the neck for the Florida Panthers in that series against the Boston Bruins. 10 points in 7 games, 6 of them being on special teams, 3-3, 23.8% shooting percentage. Even though it can be skewed with a 7 game series as well. But there's also other questions for the Toronto Maple Leafs. There's one about the goalie situation where Samsonov went to salary arbitration and got lower than what he wanted. I know he did not finish the series, but also about what, and also about the contract status of William Nylander. And we're seeing that he's being tried out at center for the Toronto Maple Leafs on that third line. Now that they lost Ryan O'Reilly to free agency to Nashville, he spoke a lot about the media pressure that comes with playing in Toronto as well. Another reason why Radko Gudas didn't sign, and Ryan Reeves, funny enough, said if Radko Gudas tries that on the Maple Leafs, things are going to happen. But as far as biggest story, as far as Samsonov and Nylander's positioning / contract status, which one do you think is the biggest one?
I think Nylander obviously moving center has been the biggest talk of camp so far, and it no one was really expecting it to happen, right? Nobody was going into the year saying now is the time to try Nylander center. It kind of just came about in that first day of like the media day for the Leafs. So that became an unexpected storyline that has really taken off, and for good reason, right? Because this guy's in a contract year. The whole offseason has been about talking about his next contract and whether he's even going to be with the Leafs past this year. So yeah, I think that's going to be the storyline to follow all year is how that all plays out, how vested they are of him playing center, and how that impacts his contract negotiation.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. I think the Nylander situation and him moving to center ice is something that we're definitely monitoring throughout the course of the preseason and early into the season. I don't think it's just going to be a tiny experiment that they try for preseason. I think this will be, a full year thing, or at least, a large segment of games he'll get at the center position. So should be interesting to see how that unfolds. It's the only other, storyline you could say that kind of piqued the interest of us here in Toronto is that Austin Matthews has been taking part in penalty killing duties this year. We got a glimpse of it in the first game that he played against Ottawa the other night, and he was on the ice for about 10 seconds with Mitch Marner killing off a penalty, and they ended up with a 2-on-1 breakaway. So that worked out well. So that's kind of interesting that Austin Matthews is being sent out in roles like that. Not sure if that's going to continue into the regular season or if they're just checking out things in the preseason. But that's one other storyline that's kind of interested people over the course of the last week or so.
Yeah, and the William Nylander, one of the best defensive wingers in the entire league. Him and Barkov are definitely going to be up there in the run for the Selke Trophy as well. And other, just like the Florida Panthers, they're relying on young guys as well on the value contracts. Matthew Nyes is going to go into his first full season with the Toronto Maple Leafs as well, and John Klingberg as well. We spoke about him being the only addition, and he's likely going to be on power play too for the Maple Leafs as well. As far as Matthew Nyes, what's the expectation for him going into this season?
It's interesting. I had to answer this question the other day. I was speaking with somebody, and they asked me what I thought Matthew Knies was going to be able to do, and I was having a thought, and it'd be too easy to come out and say, "Oh, did you see how well he played in the playoffs? Like this guy's going to have a monster year, compete with Bedard for Rookie of the Year, have a 30-goal seat." Like I just don't know if that's good. If those should be the expectations that we should be placing on Matthew Nyes. I think that a good season for him would be, 20-ish goals, maybe 50 points in the 45 to 50 realm. Like the kid's still only 20 years old, and we don't know where he's going to play in this lineup, what his role is going to be, whether it's could be on the second line, could be on the third line. But regardless, I do think that he will make the team. I think that he'll be a part of, the second power play unit. And a guy who can move up and down in the lineup if need be. But ultimately, I still think there's going to be some sort of growing pains. Like there wasn't any in the playoffs. I think he was kind of playing very naively throughout the playoffs, which helped him for sure. But a full season in the NHL, getting in, working in, traveling into his schedule and having to play 82 games, which is something he's clearly never done coming from the NCAA. I think there's going to be a little bit of adjustment period at some point here. But I still think that we're looking at a kid who could probably pot 20 or so goals this year, and people should be happy with that.
Yeah, I mean, he's made such a big impact since arriving. He went right from playing in the Frozen Four, the NCAA tournament, to right playing in the NHL and didn't look out of place. There's not many players that are able to do that, especially at his age, as Mike mentioned. So the Leafs should have high hopes for him because they've thrown a lot at him right out of the gate, and it didn't phase him. Are there going to be growing pains? Absolutely, there always are with young players. But those are the things you're going to take because the Leafs need these young guys to start stepping up for them. Everyone talks about how do the Leafs get over paying their big forwards or their big guys a lot of money. Well, it comes with the prospects and the younger players stepping up. That's how every team does it every year is they get the young guys to step up. And it's nice to not only see him step up in a role, but in a bigger role, right? Like nobody expected Matthew Nice to play on the top line in the playoffs until he put himself in a position to do that and was good at it, right? Like they kept giving reasons for us to say, this might be too much for him. And he's like, no, I can handle it. And that's something I think that Leafs fans should be excited for this year. And I think, you have to temper expectations whenever you have a young player, but he's broken every single barrier that's been placed in front of him.
True.
Yeah, and just like the Panthers, with some of their young guys, they're definitely gonna need to be banking on those cheaper contracts in order to get over the hump while you're paying your big guys. But we're gonna transition over to segment number 2 of this special crossover edition of Locked On Panthers and Locked On Leafs, where the guys will be asking me some Florida Panthers related questions. But first, we're gonna tell you all about DoorDash. And are you missing the syrup for your pancakes or just ran out of your favorite coffee creamer? With DoorDash grocery delivery, you can get what you want right when you need it. Burnt your last piece of toast, avocado's gone bad, or got the hot sauce bottle empty? Try grocery delivery from DoorDash. You'll get everything you want delivered when you need it, right to your door. You trusted DoorDash to deliver you restaurant favorites, and now you can get grocery delivery that delivers too. With thousands of grocery stores to choose from, you'll find the best in your neighborhood. Boost your local economy with each and every order. You'll get exactly what you ordered, or we'll make it right. So sit back, enjoy the quality groceries just like you picked them yourself. With easy substitutions right in the app and best-in-class customer support, DoorDash delivers groceries exactly how you want it. Get 50% off your first DoorDash order up to $20 value when you use code LOCKED at checkout. Limited time only. Limited time offer. Terms apply. That's 50% off up to $20 minimum subtotal and 0 delivery fees on your first order when you download the DoorDash app in the App Store and enter promo code LOCKED. Don't forget, that's code LOCKED for 50% off your order with DoorDash. Segment number 2 here on this special crossover edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast and Locked On Toronto Maple Leafs podcast. We now turn to the Locked On Leafs guys for some Florida Panthers related questions.
Well, I'll kick it off here, Dave. And, Armando, obviously, the Leaf season was cut short last year after getting eliminated by the Florida Panthers, who made just a Cinderella run all the way to the Stanley Cup final. It was a solid season for them, obviously. And I'm sure they're all happy about it. And who could forget about the magical run that Sergei Bobrovsky went on during that run there, and in particular, the second and third round. What I want to know is, are there expectations for him to play like that again this year? Like, what are the expectations on a guy like Sergei Bobrovsky for Florida Panthers fans?
I don't expect it to be God mode as far as what happened in the second and third round for the Panthers. But
My follow up to that is, does Bobrovsky, if he doesn't play in God mode, like what does that mean for this Panthers team then?
okay, if he's not in God mode, if you're seeing a 906, 907 save percentage, I think you're still gonna give him a starts here and there. I think he's still gonna get a majority of them. Spencer Knight is he just came back from the NHL/NHLPA Players Assistance Program and only faced 13 shots in the first end of the doubleheader on Monday. The Florida Panthers were really possessing the puck. I mean, they drew 9 penalties in that first game against Nashville on Monday. So they had the puck a lot in the other zone. So the movement was great for Spencer, and Sergei Bobrovsky went 14 of 15 in the second part of the doubleheader against Nashville, and stopping 3 breakaways when the Florida Panthers turned it over on their other end. So, I mean, the guy gets on top of it, his crease, takes away the angles, and that's just what a 2-time Vezina Trophy winner who's gone through the mud has been able to do. But if he's not, you still have insurance policies. I mentioned Spencer Knight, and also there's Anthony Stolarz. Never played a full season, has 81 games to be exact under his belt in a few seasons with Anaheim, and doesn't get a big load of games. But the Florida Panthers learned one thing, and that was that a third goalie as insurance is key. That's what happened when Alex Lyon came into the mix, getting the Florida Panthers to the postseason. I know we spoke about on our crossover before the playoffs about the epic rant that Paul Maurice went on the Leafs bench that really helped the Panthers get to the postseason, because that was the start of a 6-1-1 stretch to get them into that final wild card spot. So the third goalie is extremely important for the Panthers. And the Anaheim Ducks, they allowed 4 more shots on goal per game than the next worst team by 4 total. And Anthony Stolarz in a better situation, depending on how many starts he gets, it's going to be better for him. Spencer Knight is still waivers exempt too, so there's a chance that when a 23-man roster comes out and they get someone off waivers, Spencer Knight could start in the AHL. If it's still too early to tell whether the Panthers will go that direction, but we will still see after the playoff run. The Panthers fans, they feel a lot better about that contract, even though it's still a good majority of the cap. The playoff run, we're not talking about having to get rid of the contract. Also he still has a no move clause still, so it's not worth entertaining it right now. It becomes a modified no trade clause next season, a 16 team no trade next offseason on July 1. So he's still going to get he's still the goalie for the Panthers this year. 60-40, that's what I'm expecting for the Panthers. But we're not going to see, I doubt we're going to see 39 wins like we did in 2022, which the Panthers outscored a lot of their issues too. But Bobrovsky was the least of the Panthers' problems in the 2022 playoffs. But do we see 9-15 like we saw in the postseason in 2023? I mean, if you're anywhere between like 907 and 910 and the Panthers score a whole bunch of goals, I think the Florida Panthers are going to be not satisfied, but content.
Well, what's the timeline on those key injuries on the blue line? Because I think that could factor in, obviously, when you got Brandon Montour and Aaron Ekblad, your 2 best defensemen who are both out for a period of time. That's gonna impact the goaltender, right? With how they play in front of them. You know what the timeline is for both of those players?
We hear different things every single time, and like about 2 or 3 weeks before media day, Bill Zito spoke with George Richards of Florida Hockey Now, saying that Montour would be ready sometime in November. Aaron Ekblad would be ready sometime in January. Then comes media day, which I was in the room to hear what Bill Zito had to say, and then he said, "Oh, it's about December 15th." I'm thinking, okay, one was November, one was January. December 15th is in between those. So it was an update without there being an update, kind of circling around the question. So,
Yeah.
but the expectation is that Montour would return first before Aaron Ekblad. Thankfully, for the Florida Panthers' sake, they're both skating in between sessions with 50 plus players in camp right now, and splitting the practices in between the practices. Montour and Ekblad are both skating, doing very, very light drills. So the encouraging thing is both of them are skating. They're not taking any part of contact as well. And one person who's working with them is new to the front office and recently on the Florida Panthers roster in Patrick Hornquist. So he's working with those guys in between the sessions for them. So they're skating, and Montour put out a lot of videos out on his rehab. Aaron Ekblad was more quiet this offseason as far as what he had going on, even though he stays in the area every offseason. But it's encouraging to at least seeing them both put on their boots and skating in between, but nothing as far as contact and all. So it's still a bits of ways to go for them.
Now, obviously, the big move that you guys made last year with Matthew Tkachuk, bringing him in, and he seemed to just reinvigorate, just re-energize a hockey market that, in a lot of ways, I felt like needed a star like Matthew Tkachuk. You guys had good players like Huberdeau. You have Barkov already there. But what has Matthew Tkachuk's addition mean to this Florida Panthers team?
Swagger. That is the word for the Florida Panthers. I mean, came out once again in media day. Didn't have as many grabbing headlines as he did in media day of 2022. Spoke about how his summer was difficult with broken sternum that he had in the Stanley Cup final, but the fact that he is ready to go. He's played in the first preseason game, which that line of Nick Cousins, Sam Bennett, and him were clicking. That line produced 6 points in their preseason opener. So that line doesn't seem to be losing a step. And on most teams, that'll be your top line for the Florida Panthers. That's your second line. Something I spoke about on my Tuesday show about how the Panthers have good problems on their hands. But you talk about the summer of Matthew Tkachuk with being on the NBA on TNT prior to a Miami Heat playoff game as well, and just being on People Magazine as well for representing the Panthers. It's like the Florida Panthers, this market, the team that is the second least valued NHL franchise according to Forbes. This guy on this team, I mean, when you think about what South Florida brings as far as weather, the relaxed vibes as well, the fact that Matthew Tkachuk talks about living in downtown Fort Lauderdale, wearing sandals everywhere he goes, and of course the team success, which he broke the record for single points in a playoff this last season, passing Dave Lowry in 1996. This guy just brings a different dimension, and he was and it's already year one. And when the Florida Panthers announced their new arena name in Amerant Bank Arena, only two guys were there in person as far as the leadership. It was Barkov and Tkachuk. So you know who your two guys are for the future of this team. Yeah, Barkov's been there for 10 years, but after one season, the fact that Matthew Tkachuk has put a totally different dimension on this team. I mean, three game winning goals in the conference final. That is worth something. And especially after not getting too high when things go right, not getting too low when things go wrong. I mean, even in the game winner against Carolina, he's like, let's get out of here. He is not satisfied until he's seeing a raising of the cup. And I think that Eastern Conference final for Matthew Tkachuk really spoke volumes of who he was as a leader.
So I am curious though, like obviously that was a massive addition that they made a season ago, and ended up carrying them all the way to a Stanley Cup final, along with some other parts, obviously, but he was definitely a driving force there. Did they do anything this offseason that maybe suggest, okay, they got that missing piece, right? They got the one that could bring him over the hill. I'm looking at the roster. I'm not quite sure if I see that missing piece, but I'm curious to get your thoughts on it.
I wouldn't say they had the missing piece added this offseason. Obviously, with the cap only going up 1 million, yeah, the Florida Panthers got 5.3 million open from their books because they had Keith Yandel's dead cap, a majority of it last season. Now it's only about $1 million for the Panthers, but still, there's only so many moves that they were able to make this offseason. I mean, you were not going to pay Radko Gudas three times four at age 33 for the Panthers. So the Panthers are a team that a lot of people come as far as reclamation projects, trading for Sam Bennett, trading for Brandon Montour. Yeah, Sam Reinhart was a 20-goal scorer when he was in Buffalo, but never a 30-goal scorer. So they needed guys who were you know, still pretty talented, but still had troubles getting success in previous stops. Oliver Ekman-Larsson is a huge one. He had 3 assists in the Panthers' first game of the doubleheader against Nashville. And yeah, he has his defensive struggles. Well aware of that, but what he can do with Montour and Ekblad gone, I think it's going to be very key for when those guys do come back and OEL is shifted down to maybe a second pair role. It's gonna help the Florida Panthers hold the fort for the first few months of the season. As far as postseason success, I mean, still remains to be seen on what that could be for the Panthers. But as far as and for the Panthers, they got a little bigger in their defensive depth. Nico Mikkola it was an addition for the Panthers. They gave him some term on his contract, and they had to sacrifice a little bit of speed to get a little bit of size, because that's what the Panthers that's what the weakness of the Panthers was when they got to the final, was the fact that the Vegas Golden Knights fourth line was constantly blocking shots, and pitting the Florida Panthers on the walls for board battles, winning to break out of their zone. And in addition, like Steven Lorentz, a guy who had a career high in hits and games played and points, it was a trade that they made for Anthony Duclair for the Panthers, and bringing in a little bit of penalty killing as well that Steven Lorentz can bring. And that guy is a grinder, just like a Ryan Lomberg as well. And you have to, I know we spoke about Bertuzzi in the last segment, but I think the guys like Lomberg, along with Steven Lorentz, are in the bottom 6, are going to be guys who are going to piss a lot of people off as far as that. And I think that's really the grit and toughness that we've seen over the last 3 years, basically, when Bill Zito took over. And it's a team that I don't think is going to be pushed around very easily.
Final one for me, and that's just, is there a player that you feel like could have a breakout year for this Panthers team? Who's someone that you're really looking forward to watching this year?
I have Anton Lundell for the Panthers. Going to be with that third line. It looks like he's going to be with Eetu Luostarinen and Sam Reinhart, and it's just very dependent on what happens with that top line. The fact that I don't think you could break up the second line right now. Carter Hagel's going to go back to the top line, and we don't know who's going to be on Barkov's wing right now. Is it going to be Sam Reinhart? Is it going to be Grigory Denisenko? Is it going to be Evan Rodriguez? Those guys. So Anton Lundell works well with Sam Reinhart, and Eetu Luostarinen got an extension as well. And the fact that he's going into a contract year as an RFA, that it's going to be huge. And the fact that they were put together during the Stanley Cup final, him and Barkov on Barkov's wing, we saw a little bit of an elevation in Anton Lundell's play as well. So that is a player that I'm expecting to break out, because he is 21 years old, still very young, and he's looking for some type of deal. I don't see any indications of a guy who is going to make more than $4 million AAV right now, but we could possibly see a deal maybe before opening night, maybe not. So we'll see on what Bill Zito's side of thinking based on this preseason. So with that is going to lead us to segment number 3, where we are going to talk about where these two teams could possibly finish in the Atlantic Division. We are going to discuss this and more here on this crossover edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers and Locked On Toronto Maple Leafs podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome back to this special crossover edition of Locked On Panthers and Locked On Toronto Maple Leafs. Thank you once again for making both of our podcasts your first listen of the day. So, guys, we spoke about possible lateral moves with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Another year of Austin Matthews possibly taking a role in penalty killing, adding something for the Leafs. The toughness that Toronto brought in Ryan Reeves and Tyler Bertuzzi and all. And with kind of a new, not necessarily new identity, but new complementary pieces for Toronto. At this point, after seeing a playoff series win, I can assume that the fan base is thinking cup or bust for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but let's start before any postseason success or anything. Where do you expect the Toronto Maple Leafs to finish in the division?
Right up top. Right up at the top. I think the division crown is well within reach, and I think that's going to be the goal for the Maple Leafs this year is to win the division, get home ice, and then hopefully it leads to more playoff success. But this is a team that had an exceptional regular season last year, finished with 111 points. It was like the third year in a row that they finished with 50 plus wins. This is a team who just continues to get better, right? And now you look at this young core and they're really in the height of their prime at 26, 27 years old with, Marner, Matthews, and Nylander. And you look at the piece that they've added, the Bertuzzis, the Domies, they've added some more impactful secondary guys. You've got young players like Matthew Nyes who could be ready to come in and take a step and compete. You've got some other guys on this team who I think are good complementary players as well. Maybe Klingberg can add a little bit more offense as well from the blue line, which is something that they've lacked a lot over the course of the last couple of years. And then Samsonov too, just coming off of a career year. He just got paid, and he's just going to be a contract year again this upcoming season, and he'll be a UFA. So he's going to want to have himself a strong showing as well. Joseph Wall, it'll be his first full year in the NHL, so we'll see what he can do with those types of duties. But I think the expectations are sky high once again for this Toronto Maple Leafs team, right? Like, this is a team that for years they've always been a good regular season team, but it's what can you do for us in the playoffs? So I think they're going to be a good regular season team again this year. I see no reason for them to take any steps back. When it comes to the division, I do believe Boston's going to take a step back. I believe Florida is going to be interesting. I don't see them as a cup contender again this year. I think that was kind of a Cinderella run. They'll definitely be fighting for a playoff spot for sure, but I'm not sure if I see them at the top of the division like they were a couple of years ago. And Tampa's lost a couple of pieces this past offseason as well. So for me, I think that this is Toronto's division to lose. I think they could definitely win this Atlantic. It's going to be tougher too, picking up points with teams like Buffalo and Ottawa, and even Detroit, getting a little better by adding DeBrincat as well. So it's going to be more difficult in some of these games for these other teams to pick up points. But I think Toronto expects to be competitive, expects to be the best team in this division, and I expect that's where they'll finish.
Yeah, I have the same expectation as Mike does, and this should be a year where maybe the regular season means a little bit more for this team. The last couple of years, it's always been just get to the playoffs because you already know you're playing one of Boston or Tampa. Maybe this is a year where you try to go in a different direction, and not only win the Atlantic Division, but give yourself the best opportunity to make the playoffs a little bit easier on you. Like that was a tough first round series against the Lightning. I think it really impacted how that second round series went for them. So if you don't have to go up against a Tampa or a Boston or whoever is in that top three in the Atlantic, it would be nice, right? It'd be a nice little change of pace for this Leafs team to have a little bit of an easier time, and also maybe not go a full 7 games in the first round too would be nice. So I think that's what the
You
expectation
only
should
won
be.
6 last year. Only won 6. Come on now.
So, yeah, it's still a full, pretty much took almost to the end. I mean, it was an overtime in game 6 as well. So I do think this is the year where the Leafs should really make the regular season mean a lot more than it has in past years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm expecting the same thing actually for the Toronto Maple Leafs as well. There's still questions on what the back end will be, but I think just like the Panthers, I mean, the Toronto Maple Leafs can outscore a lot of their issues, especially with a lethal power play who I believe they finished second in the NHL, only behind the Edmonton Oilers. So that it's a very dangerous team as far as offense as well. But it's funny because you talk about the win over the Tampa Bay Lightning. Mikhail Sergachev disagrees on the whole winning around and then what happened in the next. But as far as the Leafs and the Panthers go in this with Toronto, I see a lot of similarities to the Panthers as far as getting the first round woes out of the way for this team. Now the mindset I see for Toronto is a round one series is not satisfying anymore. That's what I feel like it was last season because of going almost 20 years as well. But flipping it to the Panthers side of things, the way I see it is you don't need to get to the Stanley Cup final to have a successful season, even though the goal is to win always. But I feel the Florida Panthers can still continue to build over years as far as continuing to be that destination franchise is still getting at least a round win for this team. And with a lot of things opening up in as far as a cap rise of 4.5 million maybe in the next year, I think the Panthers that is going to be a big benchmark as far as the long term. Short term, of course, you want to win the cup, but as far as the Panthers, I'm seeing somewhere as far as 2 to 3 in the division, and floor being, possibly the last wild card spot again, because it's going to be tough to replace Montour and Ekblad. But so far, so good with what happened in game 1 of the preseason, and it's not something to overreact to. But if we see a performance like I didn't even mention his name yet, Dmitry Kulikov as well, who's returning for the Panthers. He's a left-handed shot who's going to play on the right side for the Panthers, and he's probably going to be likely going to be maybe with Josh Mahura in that bottom pair, which Josh Mahura played 82 games after being claimed off of waivers from the Anaheim Ducks. So value pickups for Bill Zito continue to be a thing as well. So for the Florida Panthers' sake of things, the whole benchmark of American Thanksgiving, which still rings true, that's your first evaluation period of the season. I want to see where the Florida Panthers are at American Thanksgiving so that we can definitely see where the trajectory is going to be when with these guys coming back. If you're floating around 500 around that time, the Panthers will be in good shape. It's not going to be easy, and that's what the cost of a Stanley Cup final run is. Bill Zito was asked that at media day. Do you see it as a good thing, a bad thing, or something that could hold this team back? Still yet to be seen. But 2 to 3 is I believe is the where I if I'm being as realistic as I can, I think that's the range as far as division finish.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to see how Florida. I think the Atlantic is such an intriguing division just because there's just so many teams that could be a playoff, that could make the playoffs. So it's going to be a fun year. It's going to be a challenging year, I think, for a lot of these teams. And I'm intrigued to see how it all plays out.
I'm going to become enemy number 1 amongst your Locked On Panthers listeners. It would not shock me, though, if Florida did miss out on the playoffs. I'll be completely honest. I think those injuries are going to be big, and it's going to take them a couple of weeks to even get back into it. Like you're looking into the new year before those guys are back to being themselves. If they do come back in December 15th, if that's the date that Bill Zito just tossed out there, that's they're going to be behind the ball for majority of the season, and this is a team that kind of struggled last year. They by just barely made the playoffs last season. They needed the Lion King to come up clutch. They needed a loss
Chicago.
from Pittsburgh to Chicago, and it was insane what happened for them to make the playoffs. And then once you get in, all you got to do is make it to the dance, and who knows what happens from there. And clearly they had a great run and went all the way to the final. I just I don't think it's going to be as big a setback as the Montreal Canadiens when they had their Cinderella run to the Cup final and then were like last place the next year, missed out on the playoffs, and like 2 years later we're picking first overall. I don't think it's going to be that drastic of a drop off, but I wouldn't be shocked if this time next year we're talking about how the Panthers had a bit of a letdown season from Cup finals to just on the outside looking in. I just think that the Atlantic has a lot of really good teams, and I think it wouldn't shock me, I suppose, if Buffalo ends up with a better record than Florida. Like Buffalo had what one point less
They're
than
1 point
Florida
up.
a year ago. I think they're a much better team, a young team that's growing. Wouldn't shock me if they ended up ahead of Florida. Ottawa, same thing. If they get off to a good start, they could end up with a better record than the Panthers. Boston, I mean, we'll see what ends up happening with them with all that they've lost. So, Florida just kind of keeps moving a little bit down. And then you got to also, if you're not in the top three, you got to compete with the teams in the Metro division for that, final, for one or two wild card spots. That's a really good division as well. So
No
I'm
doubt.
not proclaiming that they're going to miss, but it wouldn't be a big surprise to me if they did, just because of how competitive the Eastern Conference is.
Yeah, and thankfully for the Panthers' sake, another year under Paul Maurice, they're going to be used to his system there, and also Matthew Tkachuk getting a full season as well, and him coming in healthy. So, despite some health issues for the Panthers, they still have some of the core pieces in place that could possibly help them get through. But it's definitely going to be a different reevaluation period once we get to that first benchmark in after just a few weeks of the season. But guys, I want to thank you so much for doing this crossover edition of Locked On Panthers and Locked On Leafs. Tell everybody where they could find you guys online.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, you can find our show wherever you stream, the Locked On Panthers show, iTunes, Spotify, the whole nine. Also up on YouTube as well, where you can subscribe. We're on a road to 5K. We crossed over the 4K line just ahead of training camp, and we're on a road to 5K. We got a 5K giveaway that we're going to be doing. So all you got to do is be a subscriber, and you can be entered into the giveaway. So if you want to go and give us a sub, that would be great. You can find my personal information, my personal Twitter /X, whatever you want to call it, at Mickey_Canuck. You can follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. And Dave, you can tell them where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Twitter formerly known as Twitter, now the X platform. I gotta still get that in my head. So you can follow me there at _Morassutti, and you can also check out my stuff over at sportsnet.ca as well.
Awesome, guys. And for the Leafs followers, you can follow me on X at MountainMan12. Follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. Thank you guys so much once again, and I'll probably see you guys somewhere throughout the season.
Absolutely, buddy.
Take it easy.